Today we've got a cautionary tale about what to do if a single radio's battery dies. We'll get into that one shortly, but first, how to be let go instead of quitting. I asked to work remotely abroad for health reasons. The company isn't registered in my country of choice, so they said it's not possible. To prolong my time spent employed, I've been taking leave on the in-person days. My manager has been supportive, but I guess HR caught on or something. She emailed me, on Friday evening of all times, and said she can't approve further leave on those days for the purpose of extending things. For context, I'm moving no matter what happens, to be closer to family and to afford the dental surgeries I need, and for general well-being outside the US, which included so much acute stress in me, I ended up in the ER. So I've already been trying to make peace with losing the job. I was just hoping to drag it out till the end of year. I thanked her for her understanding and requested to use all the rest of my annual leave over the next 2.5 weeks. I checked with HR a while back, and our leave system is not accrued, so employees can use them all anytime. HR gave me two options: leave of absence and short-term disability. I've been employed for less than a year, so employee protection doesn't apply to me, and I could get fired during that period. The company that processes the request told me to first file for a leave of absence and then a short-term disability benefit once my 5-week intensive outpatient treatment starts. 5 weeks. It's for the DBT therapy, but I've asked my primary care doctor to state that it's for intensive outpatient procedure without the need to go into great detail about whether it's physical or behavioral. I don't know what to do past that. There's no guarantee that my leave of absence or STD request will be approved. I'm hoping they let me go, so maybe I can collect unemployment. Since I have nothing to lose, I plan to ask my manager if I can be converted to a contractor temporarily, but I don't know if it's also worth asking her to consider letting me go rather than me to outright quit. Well, like you just said, OP, you literally have nothing to lose here, so shoot the shot. Make it grandiose. Why not? Silverfish477 replied, "Please don't tell me you think you can use a full year's worth of annual leave when you're expecting to be let go before that full year is complete. You'll have a nasty surprise on your last pay packet." And OP replied to this, "Thank you so much for this. At the moment, I've already used some of my annual leave, almost half. I basically want to explore what options I have within legal bounds. Is it wise to just opt for the leave of absence and hope they fire me, or I just quit outright? Any value to talking to my boss about quitting versus her letting me go? Also, hey everybody, my name is Brendan, and if you guys enjoy these malicious compliance videos, it would be amazing if you liked the video or commented down below if you're listening to our podcast. Now then, our next story is, you want us to refer to you by your job title? Okay then. In a previous role, I came across the epitome of manglement. A young Dumbo who'd been smarmy enough to work his way into a leadership role without ever having to actually do the job he was managing. Unsurprisingly, he was less than effective. To use his words, we were the skilled team that worked for him. He was in the management. There are a few stories I can share about this Richard, including one where he said I was too attractive to do my job, but that's for another time. This particular anecdote was when the previous leader left, and we ended up with him. Our new leader was quite particular about his role. He wasn't just a leader, he was a production leader. He was quite insistent we called him by his job title, to the extent that he moaned when we said, "Oh, the gaffer says XYZ. Nope, it must be the production leader says XYZ. Please respect his job. Thanks." I assume this was his pretentious effort to seem important. Remember I said he'd never worked the job before? He never quite understood the details of what he was asking, and you could see his eyes glaze over and his mind wander to KPIs and metrics whenever someone said, that won't work. We need to do ABC first before we throw this job onto the machines." For the most part, we just worked it out ourselves and did what we could, and explained what we couldn't. More glazing over and thoughts of metrics and checkboxes followed. His general demeanor didn't really sit well with us, especially how he thought he was better than the grunts working the job. The one thing that sticks in my mind is that the previous boss, who had retired, used to say "our team," and the new guy said "my team." Small difference, but it speaks volumes. So we decided to maliciously comply. You want to be called by your job title? Sure, we can do that. However, we abbreviate everything, including your job title. Production Leader, Operations. That abbreviated to PL Ops, which abbreviated to PLOPS. I can't take credit for the nickname, but it spread super quick. The malicious compliance was embedded. Within 36 hours, every shift knew that we had to follow Plops's orders. For non-English speakers, plops is an onomatopoeic way of describing the act of passing feces. Plops was obviously quite unhappy with his new nickname. Just imagine the most nasally voice ever saying, "I'm a production leader," to a group of guys, most of which had been in the trade since before Plops was born. And you've got a good idea of how well respected Plops ended up being. For the rest of his short career in that role, we called him Plops. It infuriated him. To give you an example of a typical incident, 3 of the shop floor guys are stood in the middle of the factory talking. Plops sees this and walks over to chastise them for not working. Plops goes, "Excuse me, gents." Guy 1 says, "What's up, Plops?" "I'm a production leader. Why aren't you on your machines?" Guy 2 says, "We're trying to figure out how to do the job." "What? Aren't you trained for this?" "We are, Plops. Been doing this for 24 years. But the problem is, Plops, we have 4 sets of tooling available. Each job requires 2 sets of tools per machine, and as there are 3 of us, we would need 6 sets of tools." "Nobody told me that." "Yeah, because we normally split the job out by individual tasks. Number 1 can process the tasks that don't need tooling, then split the tasks between number 2 and number 3. Doesn't matter what order these are done in, so we split the batches 2 to 1, then swap. You have a better solution?" No, do that. Thanks for your advice, Plops." Plops walked away looking very red, with the guys bursting out laughing while still very much in earshot. Plops complained numerous times, and the chief of production told us off in a very half-arsed way. We later found out he also hated Plops for consistently bringing his nickname up and expecting something to be done, often telling him that this wasn't a school and to just play along and it'll naturally go away. Fast forward to one day when Plops was late for a site-wide meeting. He entered the room to be met with 2 or 3 voices chastising him with comments such as, "What time do you call this, Plops?" and "Good grief, it's Pops o'clock." Turning a now familiar shade of crimson, he opened his mouth, but then noticed the director of operations, Dops, stood at the front, having paused his speech. Plop shut his mouth and quickly found a seat. The director continued for a bit before pausing to ask if anybody had any questions. Plop's hand immediately shot up. "Apologies for being late, but I had a question about the half-year business projections given the ramp-up in production. Was this already covered, or is this a good time to ask the question?" This question had absolutely nothing to do with anything we did, and it was painfully obvious Plops was just asking the question to seem even more pretentious than he normally was. The director replied, quote, "Not a problem, Plops, maybe save that one for the end." This was too much for everybody else, who burst out laughing. The director didn't know who Plops was and assumed that was his name. The director innocently asked, "Oh, is that not his name?" Someone explained it was a nickname. He was called John. The director apologized to Plops, presumably trying to hide his embarrassment. Said, "Don't worry, it wasn't an important question." After the meeting, Plops excused himself and we didn't see him for the rest of the day. He was back in the following day with an even more sour face than normal. We were all still giddy about how the director had called him Plops, so we just gave him a wide berth. A few days later, when the atmosphere had calmed down, Plops announced at a meeting that he'd accepted a similar role at another site and would be transferring in the next week. We then found out that Plops had complained yet again about a director, no less, to the chief, who had now got fed up of having to baby the kid and had a quiet word with the director. Said director, presumably wanting to save face a little, advised that another production lead at a different facility was going on maternity leave, so Plops could be parachuted into that role fairly easily. They then had the best part of a year to find somewhere else for him. We weren't sad to see Plops go, but he forgot to bring in cakes on his last day. So one of the guys who'd worked with some of the staff in the new facility made a phone call. From what I understand, Plop's outgoing counterpart introduced him at one of their morning meetings and invited him to speak. He said, "Good morning, I'm John and I'll be taking over from Lisa while she's off. I'm an experienced production leader, so I'm hoping we can keep the wheels turning whilst Lisa and I make the transition. Wishing her the best with the baby and for new parent life." A chorus of voices came from across the room. "Well said, Plops." We eventually got a new production leader, who'd worked in a similar role at another company. He seemed to be a decent guy. At his first meeting, he introduced himself and brought in a crate of homemade samosas. He said he didn't want to intrude on our workstations unnecessarily, and thus asked everybody to pop into his office at some point in the next day or two to introduce themselves and have a 5 to 10 minute chat. I was nominated by the guys to go first and report back on how he was. I summarized his personality with one observation before I'd even sat down. I walked over to the office door and knocked. He waved at me to come in, and as my gaze went upwards, I noticed the new sign he'd put on the door. Plop's office. Yeah, that's a nickname, unfortunately, he's never going to be able to outrun. As long as he continues to be around in that area, those people, even though they might have forgiven him for the way he treated people, like he's just always going to be Plops. Cheese Nuggets 2003 posted, I have to ask, if Plops had brought in cakes, might his nickname have stayed in your facility? And OP replied to this, the other facility wouldn't have been aware of his nickname, so it certainly wouldn't have followed him there had he brought in cakes. To be honest, we were so glad to be rid of him that cakes would have made us happy and potentially even resulted in a best of luck, John send-off. However, I hear he was just as pompous in the new facility too, so I'm sure they would have come up with something too. Our next story is, politicians ignore warnings about publishing everyone's data online. Back when every business and government was starting to get their services accessible online for the first time, there is a new law passed in my state that all local government public records must be accessible via the web. Those records held by local government included dog registrations, building plans and permits, property ownership information, etc. Until this point, you had to physically turn up at the local government offices and have your name recorded to access such information, but it was free to access and they were not permitted to deny you. At the time, I was the webmaster for one of the local government areas in Australia. When this was first proposed, we highlighted that residents would be very upset by making this information easier to access, and potentially for people to scrape the entire dataset. Tests to prove you were human were not very reliable back then. This was politics, so we were somewhat surprised that the politicians didn't see the potential public backlash. We also wanted to protect our residents from people who would try to abuse or profit from mass access to this information. Our warnings were ignored, so we complied, maliciously. I wrote an absolutely brilliant information portal with the best CAPTCHA we could implement at the time, which complied exactly with what the law required. We ensured the local newspaper knew the exact date and time it would go online and what would be published. It was easy to find and put in a lot of time to ensure news media would be able to easily demonstrate the potential harm. The following day, front page news about the massive privacy issues this could pose. That morning, we were told to take it offline, and it stayed offline permanently. The portal was up for a total of 27 hours. In the aftermath, politicians tried to shift the blame to our local government leadership, who shifted it to us in the IT department. We had prepared a paper trail to ensure that those truly responsible were given all the credit for the project, and those who rebuffed our warnings had their emails included in the Freedom of Information requests made during the investigation. Like I always say on this channel, paper trail, paper trail, paper trail. You cannot argue with anything that is in writing or twist the facts. DNABSU1 added, unfortunately, that sort of information is very available, and I was told was legally required to be available in places in the US. I found that out when I decided to start paying my water bill online. I went to their portal and it has a lookup for your info by account ID, name, or location. You just need one piece of this information to find the bill. If you just type in part of a street name, you can see all the matches. So I can manually find anyone I know in town and figure out if they paid their water bill. I wound up contacting the local water authority and was told that because it's a water authority, the bills are public record, and they're just using the same system that's used for the township taxes. Since my mortgage company always paid the taxes, I didn't look at that site before, but lo and behold, I can see lots of tax details, randomly found some delinquent people, etc. This is all in the name of transparency in government, but also a very crappy interface run by a vendor who apparently has contracts with local governments throughout the US. Our next story is, you're gonna have to take that up with the landlord. There's a tiny guy that lives downstairs with me that has the Napoleon complex bad. He's a bad neighbor in every way imaginable. He plays loud music once every few days, but he's way too old to be doing that, mid-40s. Anyway, the first time I went to talk to him about it, he said he would stop, and he did for a few weeks. The second time I went to talk to him about it, he said, "You're gonna have to take it up with the landlord," and closed the door. So I did. He got a €100 fine. He was not happy about that. Yeah, I don't really know what he was expecting here. Like, what did he think the landlord was going to say? Yeah, it's okay to blast loud music throughout all hours of the night. Oh my goodness. €100 fine, though. Not bad, not bad. Our next story is, can't be 2 minutes late. So I used to work for this terrible manager in a pharmacy. Let's call him Edwin. He was the kind of guy who wanted to greet every client in an insanely busy store. He was the type that wanted to introduce a color wheel for when I made creams and such, and he was an overall terrible person. Edwin was the type that didn't let me go to a funeral of a friend of mine who died at 23, and the next day he could leave because he had to walk his dog. After a few years, I was done with all that crap. The last figurative drop? Him giving me this lecture in front of our patients when I was late because a bus broke down and I couldn't get in. He told me, work hours are from 9 to 12 and from 1 to 6:30. Got it, mate? I stopped going to the lessons we got from people during my break and got on at exactly 9 to clock in. Then he commented that I usually was early. I told him, you said my hours are between 9 and 6:30. No exceptions? And gave him a confused look. So whenever I was helping a patient, I would drop everything and stop at that exact hour. He fired me. I went to the union and was paid for 2 more years by this pharmacy. Later, I learned that during Corona, he made his people work with that virus. So what did I do? I called my county's FDA and told them all about it. The pharmacy is still crapped down. Yeah, you treat people like that, you deserve a little mal-see. So yeah, go ahead and expose those secrets. Why would you make people work with COVID? That's terrible. Our next story is, Landlord maliciously complianced themselves. This happened a few years ago, in my last apartment. My roommate and I were living in a basement place with upstairs neighbors, and the owner decided he wanted to sell. The upstairs neighbors ended up buying it and became our new landlords, and they were awful at it. I could fill a whole post with the amount of stuff they tried to get away with, but we're here to talk about one particular instance. But suffice to say, they had no idea that landlords had responsibilities, and simply saw us tenants as a source of income that should be ever growing, hence our rent suddenly spiking and why we left. But there was one time they maliciously complianced themselves. See, they had a habit of trying to push stuff on us that was blatantly illegal. Their first contract, for example, said among other things that they had the right to enter the apartment at any time they wanted and go through our stuff if they wished because we were, quote, living on their property. I pointed out that this was highly illegal, and they grew very upset, saying, well, we'll see about that. This clause later became the real one before we signed. One day, however, our lone fire alarm stopped working. As dutiful tenants, we reached out and said, hey, the fire alarm stopped working. Their response was a predictable sort of, so what? We need to have a working fire alarm, we replied, and it's the landlord's duty to provide working fire alarms. No, it's not. You want one? You get it. The law says otherwise, and here's where they maliciously complianced themselves. Because they were getting tired of being corrected, they got snooty with this one. We got a very sarcastic response. Oh, it does it? Well, we'll just see what the fire marshal has to say about that. Me and my roommate, upon receiving this message, burst out laughing. But they were serious. They thought they were going to contact the fire marshal, he was going to side with them, and then they could come down on us hard. I don't know what their expressions were when we said, okay, yeah, do that. However, the next morning, there's frantic knocking at our door. There's the landlord and his family looking very concerned, with a bag of brand new fire alarms, one for each room, and if I recall correctly, even 2 spares. He begs to be let in outside of the 24-hour notice and says it's an emergency. He has to put these alarms up right now. Trying not to laugh, we let them in, and they hurriedly put one in every single room, apologizing profusely for the delay and telling us, quote, if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. I don't know how that meeting with the fire marshal went, or if they got him or someone else at their office, but their attitude painted a pretty clear picture of the ultimate result. They complied maliciously, thinking they'd called our bluff. Whoops. Yeah, I feel like you should have just basic knowledge of the law and landlord laws before you become a landlord or allowed to do so. Or maybe they were educated and just didn't absorb that information. Either way, that's tough. Mr. Spiffenheimer replied, "Yeah, the fire marshal does not freak around. When he gives you 24 hours to remedy a problem, he's being very generous, and your consequences can be pretty extreme for missing that deadline." Our next story is, want me to attend chapel services when I'm an atheist? Fine. Years ago, I taught at a religious school, all girls and boarding. It was Anglican, not Catholic, so they didn't require you to be members of a church before you could even apply for a job. When I went for my job interview, I was quite concerned that, as an atheist, I'd have problems, but the principal, to her credit, was quite laid back. When I asked if I'd be expected to teach religion, she looked quite shocked and told me, "Goodness, no, we have experts for that." She even managed to cope with finding out that I was riding a motorbike to work. Shock! Horror! Of course, I was careful to not park near the school for the first 6 months and kept my leathers under my desk. So years go by and we went through a new principal and then another. Unfortunately, this new one decided that all staff had to attend the chapel services at the start of the year and on any pupil-free days. I pointed out that I was an atheist and felt that I would be mocking the staff who were truly devout if I attended and pretended to be religious. I point-blank refused to take communion. Eventually, she conceded the communion issue, but still insisted that I had to attend. So I went to the chaplain, who was a really nice guy and didn't deserve to be disrespected, and explained what was going on and what I'd be doing. From then on, at any services, I simply sat at the very back row with my headphones on and reading a book. Nothing was said, and after 6 months or so, I just stopped going, and it was never brought up again. I taught there for over 25 years before retiring. Sungor replied, "There's no way that the chaplain would have wanted you to take communion as a non-believer. In some churches, that would be considered pretty close to blasphemous." I Want a Shmoo added, "I used to go to Christmas Eve service with my husband's family out of politeness. I'm an atheist, but why not? Communion comes up, and the first year I stayed in my seat. I got a lot of ugly glares. The second year I went up and did this thing with my hands. They told us to do this if we did not want to partake. You would think I betrayed Jesus myself. I almost gave the lady handing out the crackers a heart attack. Third year, I just ate the stale cracker and drank the cheapest, grossest wine known to man. Go home, scrubbed, not brush my teeth, and had good wine. I think what I did was disrespectful, but also not given much of a choice." Our next story is, if a single radio's battery dies, shut it all down. This happened over 5 years ago, and it still ticks me off whenever I think about it. Also, sorry for how long this is. I was 17, working at a big theme park, and had been working there for the better part of a year. I'd quickly picked things up, and was usually regarded as the responsible one on the team, when it was just a bunch of us teens working a ride. We had a college student intern lead who was not good at leading, or training new hires. We'll call him M. At my main ride, it required 3 people minimum to operate, 1 person in the control booth, 1 at the entrance gate, and 1 at the exit. However, we could have 4 or 5 if we were incredibly busy to help deal with the line. The people in the booth and at the entrance could not see the person at the exit directly, so we used radios. The control booth also had a camera on the exit gate. From day 1 on the job, we were taught hand signals in case the radio dies or for quick communication. These signals were universal across the entire park. That summer, 3 freshly certified kids, we had to take tests to prove we paid attention to training, started to ride with someone locked inside the fence, aka not in a seat. Twice it was another employee, once it was a guest, which is a huge deal. The thing with those incidents was that those in the control booth didn't notice their mistake until the others screamed at them to hit the E-stop. Those new hires were either retrained or moved to a simpler ride. Well, one incredibly busy day, there were 5 of us running things, me, M, and 3 others. M had been called over to another ride, which normally wasn't an issue. About an hour later, someone was scheduled to go home, and M hadn't come back yet. I called the other side and asked them to send him back. We could have run things with 3 of us, but it was super busy, and we really needed a 4th. A few minutes later, someone, not our lead, was sent to take over. Weird, but no big deal. Another hour or so went by, and someone else needed to go home. I called again asking for M. Also, all the radio's batteries were dead or dying. Things had slowed down, so I, being the spare 4th person, took the radios to the office to get fresh batteries. This took less than 10 minutes, and in that time, the guys had switched to hand signals as we were trained. When I came back, our lead had once again sent over someone else to take his spot. At this point, I realized that M was probably just shooting the crap in the air-conditioned booth at the other side. Now, the guy that got sent over to us was normally at a roller coaster and hadn't been at this ride in over a month, so I gave him a quick review and he took controls. I turned around for maybe 30 seconds when I hear yelling. I turn around and the ride was stopped maybe 3 feet off the ground with our entrance guy locked in the fence. The guy at controls saw what he did and hit the e-stop, something that the other screw-ups that summer did not think to do. We had to call upper management, and wouldn't you know, M came running over. This time, the highest of the higher-ups came over as well. They pulled each of us aside and interrogated us, which was odd, then walked away and talked for like half an hour. Then they fired the guy at the controls on the spot and came up with BS reasons to get the rest of us removed from running rides. They absolutely were only doing that to make an example of us. I tried to rip into M for shirking his duties, but as an anxiety-ridden kid, it didn't hit very hard. I was mainly ticked off that they fired the poor guy who never should have been there in the first place. Remember I took the already dead radios earlier? They tried to say I'd removed communication devices from the ride area, which prevented them from letting controls know they were outside the gate. They were basically trying to pin the whole thing on me. Total bull, because this happened after I brought them back. I assume M threw me under the bus for being in charge while he wasn't there. Also, we had hand signals. I tried explaining that to them, but they didn't give a crap. I refused to sign the paperwork, which would be admitting fault, so this fight was stretched over multiple days. Plus, I was leaving for college in like 2 weeks and didn't want to spend my last days of summer cleaning bathrooms. They gave us a new rule. If a single radio was dying, we had to call a manager to fetch us a new battery, even if we had people to spare to go grab one instead. If a radio died, we had to close the ride. Managers roamed around the whole area and were responsible for so much. So if you called them and it wasn't urgent, it could take a long time for them to show up. The next day, my radio was dying. I called the manager, half hour goes by. I call again. My radio died. I shut down the ride. The people in the over an hour line got ticked. I explained to people that we had to close because of the radios. Naturally, they got even more ticked because of how stupid that was. Manager shows up minutes later. I took the battery from him with a smile on my face and he left without saying a word. After many complaints, management was magically fine with us using hand signals again. I never signed that paperwork. I left for college, and funny enough, M also went to the same college. I ran into him once. He just kind of nodded at me. I gave him a dirty look, and I never saw him again. The next summer, I was rehired by the park as a lead and actually did my dang job. Yeah, I feel like in all work environments, there need to be practical, common sense-based solutions to work around when technology fails. This is one of them, and I'm glad that ultimately they got the big picture here. Zumbo Prime added, "Good for you for turning the crowd on the right people. What I want to know is why the freak OP went back after they fired someone for hitting the e-stop correctly and tried to blame the entire debacle on him, she, or her." Alright everybody, that's all the time we got for today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and comment down below. And if you want to check out any of our other videos, click the video on the right. I got nothing else for you. I will see you all next time.